Ahmad stood at the check-in counter, tapping his fingers on the sleek, polished surface. It had been hours since he arrived at the airport, and despite the clear signs of stress on the faces of the staff, nothing had been done to resolve the issue. Flight 107, heading to New York, was supposed to be a straightforward journey, first class, the luxury he was accustomed to, and the space to relax before an important business meeting in the city. But now, it felt like a nightmare unfolding before him. The terminal buzzed with passengers rushing past, all eager to board their flights. But Ahmad couldn't shake off the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. He had been given no clear answers, only vague apologies and promises that the issue would be resolved shortly. But hours had passed, and nothing had changed. He adjusted his jacket, the weight of the situation beginning to sink in. The airline had assured him that his ticket was confirmed months ago, an upgrade to first class as part of his loyalty with the airline. Yet, here he was, stuck in the terminal, watching as other passengers with economy tickets boarded ahead of him. He could feel the murmurs of disbelief and frustration from those around him, but he didn't care about their complaints. This was about more than just a seat. This was about dignity. "Sir, I understand your frustration, but there's nothing I can do at this moment," the gate agent, a woman in her mid-30s with dark, tired eyes, said as she glanced up at him for the third time. "We've overbooked first class. We can offer you a seat in economy, or you can reschedule for the next flight." He took a deep breath, trying to suppress the wave of anger rising within him. Ahmad had always prided himself on his ability to keep his composure in any situation. As the CEO of a successful tech firm, he had learned that the key to overcoming obstacles was often patience. But patience had its limits. "I don't think you understand," Ahmad said, his voice steady but firm. "I paid for a first-class ticket. I've been a loyal customer for years. I expect to be treated with respect." His words hung in the air, sharp with intent. The agent's expression didn't change. She seemed detached, resigned to the situation, like she had been through countless similar confrontations. But for Ahmad, this was different. This wasn't just about a seat on a plane. It was a matter of principle. He had worked hard for his success, and being treated like just another nameless passenger was an insult. The silence between them stretched out, and Ahmad could feel the pressure mounting. It wasn't just the inconvenience of the delay, or the exhaustion from a long day of travel. It was the indignity of it all. He was being forced to wait, to accept second-class treatment despite his loyalty and status. "Sir," the agent continued, her voice losing some of its professionalism, "you'll need to speak with our manager. If you want any further assistance. I've told you everything I can." Ahmad clenched his fists, his eyes narrowing. The manager. He'd been around long enough to know what that meant, another round of empty promises and delays. But this time, he wasn't going to accept it. The frustration he had been bottling up for hours surged to the surface. He couldn't let this go. "Give me a moment," Ahmad said, his tone colder now, as he stepped away from the counter. He turned towards the crowded terminal, trying to steady his breathing. His thoughts raced. How could this be happening? Why had he been treated like this? His mind worked quickly, thinking through the options. He could escalate the situation. He could complain to the airline, demand a refund, or perhaps even take legal action. But that would take time, and time was a luxury he didn't have. His flight was essential for his business, a crucial meeting that could determine the future of his company. He took out his phone, staring at the screen for a moment. There was one person he could call, the person who could make this whole situation disappear with a single word. Ahmad had built his empire on connections, on the relationships he had nurtured over the years. And there was no one more important in this moment than the CEO of the airline, a man he had met on several occasions at high-profile business events. They had mutual respect for each other, though they had never been particularly close. But Ahmad knew that in times like this, it was connections that mattered. He dialed the number, his thumb hovering over the call button for a brief moment. This was a calculated move. If the CEO answered, it would mean an immediate resolution. If not, it would be a waste of time, but time was running out. The phone rang once, twice, before the line clicked, and a familiar voice answered. "Ahmad, my friend, it's good to hear from you. What's going on?" Ahmad's voice remained calm, but there was an edge to it now. "I'm at the airport, and I've been told I can't board my flight. First class is overbooked, and they're trying to force me into economy. I need this resolved immediately." There was a long pause on the other end, and Ahmad could almost feel the CEO processing the information. "Overbooked? That's unacceptable. I'll have someone look into it right away. Stay put, I'll get back to you in a few minutes." Ahmad didn't need to say another word. The call ended, and for a moment, he stood there, the weight of the situation lifting just slightly. But even as he waited, he couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was at play. Something wasn't right. He glanced back at the counter, where the agent was still going through her routine, indifferent to the storm that was brewing behind the scenes. The clock ticked louder. He needed to know what was happening, needed to find out why a simple mistake had turned into this elaborate ordeal. Minutes passed. And Ahmad's patience was running thin. His thoughts kept circling back to the same question: why was this happening to him? He had been traveling for years without any issues. So why now? Why today? His phone buzzed. It was the CEO. "Ahmad," the voice on the other end was sharper now, "there's something strange going on. I've just been informed that your booking was flagged. It's been marked as a potential issue by our systems. We're not sure why, but it seems like your ticket wasn't processed properly in our system. I'll have a team member reach out to you to sort this out." Ahmad's heart skipped a beat. His booking had been flagged? That didn't make sense. He had the confirmation, the receipts, everything in order. It felt like there was something he wasn't being told, something important. The CEO continued, "I'm getting you on that flight. Just hang tight. We'll get this sorted." Ahmad could hear the sincerity in the CEO's voice, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Why had his booking been flagged? And why hadn't anyone noticed this earlier? The mystery of it all began to gnaw at him, pulling at his thoughts. But there was no time for second-guessing. This situation was far from over. And Ahmad knew that, no matter what, he was not going to let this slide. A few minutes later, a staff member arrived at the counter, confirming that his seat had been cleared, and he was free to board. The issue had been resolved, but the unease lingered. As Ahmad walked down the jet bridge to the plane, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much larger, something that would force him to confront not only his own beliefs and values but also the hidden forces at play in the world of corporate power. The flight had been delayed, but Ahmad had made it aboard. As the plane's engines roared to life, he settled into his seat, knowing that the answers he was searching for were still out there. And the questions? They were only just beginning. Ahmad leaned back in his seat, his fingers gripping the armrests of the first-class cabin as the plane taxied down the runway. The familiar hum of the engines was comforting, but the unease gnawing at him wouldn't let go. Despite the resolution of the issue with his ticket, something didn't feel right. His mind raced through the events of the last few hours, the sudden overbooking, the phone call, the flagging of his booking. None of it made sense. He glanced around at the other passengers, most of whom were already settling in, headphones on, reading, or chatting casually. But Ahmad couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was at play. This wasn't just a mistake. This was deliberate. But who had done it? And why? He looked down at his phone, the screen dark. He didn't want to make another call just yet. But his instincts were telling him that there was more to this than a simple customer service issue. His gut told him that the problem was tied to something larger, something in the business world he had yet to uncover. The plane finally took off, and as the city lights below grew smaller, Ahmed's thoughts drifted back to the conversation he had had with the CEO of the airline. The fact that his ticket had been flagged as a potential issue was something he couldn't ignore. There was no logical reason why it would have been flagged. He was a loyal customer, and his company was one of the most respected in the industry. So, why had he been treated like just another nameless passenger? A brief memory resurfaced, his recent acquisition of a rival tech company. The deal had been a major one, and although the negotiations had been tough, Ahmad had secured a highly lucrative agreement that would propel his company to even greater heights. Could this have anything to do with the airline? Could his success, or perhaps his enemies, be the reason behind this strange encounter? His mind shifted to the question of what had truly happened behind the scenes. Airline systems didn't flag customers without reason, and the fact that he had been singled out meant there was something more at play here. Something that the airline didn't want him to know. Or perhaps someone at the top didn't want him to know. The moment the seatbelt sign was turned off, Ahmad quickly gathered his things and made his way to the restroom. He needed to think, to process everything that had happened. He locked the door behind him and stared at his reflection in the mirror. His usual confident demeanor had cracked. Now there was a look of confusion mixed with a rising sense of dread. Was this just a coincidence, or was it something more? Had someone used their influence to get to him? And who would do that? As he stood there, trying to make sense of the situation, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from an unknown number, something he rarely saw these days. At first, Ahmad hesitated to open it. But curiosity quickly won out. The message was short but to the point. "I know what you did. It's not over. Watch your back." The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. The message was cryptic, yet its meaning was clear. Whoever had sent it knew something about the situation, something he didn't know. Someone had been watching him. But who? He immediately tried to call the number back, but the phone rang unanswered. His pulse quickened. Whoever this was, they weren't making it easy for him to get answers. He stared at the phone screen, his mind racing with possibilities. This wasn't just about a seat on a plane anymore. Someone was pulling strings behind the scenes, and Ahmad was the target. He stepped out of the restroom, his thoughts scattered. There was no way he could relax now. He returned to his seat, staring out the window at the dark sky stretching out ahead of him. What did this all mean? How deep did this go? He needed answers. He needed to know who was behind this, and why. The unseen forces at play. The rest of the flight felt like an eternity. Ahmad barely touched his food and didn't even bother with the entertainment system. His mind was consumed by the message. His gut told him that he wasn't just dealing with a random act of customer service failure. No, this was personal. And as the plane soared through the night sky, Ahmad's mind kept circling back to one thought: who had done this? The message kept replaying in his mind: "I know what you did." What had he done? Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing illegal or even questionable. So, what was it that this person knew? He leaned forward in his seat, his elbows on his knees, trying to calm his thoughts. He had to approach this logically. Who would benefit from sabotaging him? Who had a reason to go after him like this? His recent acquisition came to mind again. It was a game changer, a big deal that would have ramifications throughout the industry. It was a hostile takeover of a rival firm that had been notorious for playing dirty in the corporate world. Maybe some of the people involved didn't like Ahmed's aggressive business tactics, but that seemed far-fetched. He had made countless deals over the years, and while not all of them were friendly, they had all been legitimate. No, this felt different. This wasn't about business, this was about something more. The plane's lights dimmed as the cabin attendants began to prepare for the descent. Ahmad, still lost in thought, barely noticed the change. His gaze shifted to the window, but his mind was elsewhere. This wasn't just about an overbooked flight, a flagged ticket, or a cryptic message. This was the beginning of something much larger. As the plane made its final descent into New York, Ahmad could feel the tension building. This was no longer a routine business trip. This was a game, and he was caught right in the middle of it. The wheels of the plane touched the tarmac, but his mind was still racing, wondering who was pulling the strings. The arrival. The moment the plane came to a halt, Ahmad gathered his belongings and headed towards the gate. His phone buzzed again, but this time, the message was even more unsettling than before. You think you're safe. You're not. You won't see it coming. His heart skipped a beat. Whoever this was knew him well, too well. They had access to information that even Ahmad hadn't fully grasped yet. He exited the plane, scanning the terminal, his senses on high alert. There was no one suspicious in sight. But he knew better than to trust appearances. Someone was watching him, waiting for the right moment to strike. Ahmad pulled out his phone and called his assistant, Julia. "Get me a full report on the airline," he said, his voice firm. "Everything, financial records, ownership, internal reports. I need it now." Julia, his ever-loyal assistant, responded immediately. "Got it, Ahmad. I'll start pulling the information right away." He hung up, and with a deep breath, he pushed through the crowd, his mind still clouded by the mystery of it all. Who had orchestrated this? Why had he been targeted? The more questions he asked, the less sense it made. As he walked through the terminal, something caught his eye, an older man in a dark suit, standing alone by a pillar, watching him intently. Their eyes met for a brief moment, but before Ahmad could react, the man quickly turned and disappeared into the crowd. His heart raced. Was this the person behind it all? Or just another coincidental encounter? Ahmad's instincts told him this was no random passerby. Whoever this was, they knew exactly where to find him. He quickened his pace, heading towards the exit. He wasn't going to let this be the end of it. He had started down a path, and he would see it through to the end. Whoever was behind this had no idea who they were dealing with. As Ahmad reached the exit doors, he felt the cold air of New York night hit his face. This was just the beginning. And as far as he was concerned, there was no turning back. The hidden threat. The cab ride to his hotel was silent. Ahmad didn't even glance at the driver as he leaned back in his seat, his mind swirling with thoughts. Whoever had orchestrated this move had done so with precision and intelligence. It wasn't a random attack, it was calculated, methodical. The driver turned down a side street, and for a brief moment, Ahmad thought he saw the same man in the dark suit from the terminal standing in the shadows, watching him. His heart skipped again, but by the time the cab made the turn, the figure was gone. Ahmad's hotel was a luxurious one, perched high above the city skyline. He checked in without incident, but as he made his way to his room, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following him. A deep sense of paranoia settled over him, and the cryptic messages that had arrived on his phone seemed to be growing more ominous by the minute. As he entered his suite, he locked the door behind him and immediately pulled up the message again. "You won't see it coming." What didn't he see coming? The attack on his reputation? The unraveling of his business? Or something far more sinister? Whatever it was, he knew one thing: he was no longer just a CEO. He was a target. And the game was just beginning. Ahmad barely slept that night. The events of the day replayed in his mind like a twisted movie. He had come to New York for a business trip, but now, nothing seemed to make sense. His flight had been sabotaged, he had received cryptic messages, and to top it all off, a shadowy figure had appeared in the terminal, watching him closely. He stood by the window, staring out at the glittering skyline of New York. The city below seemed so alive, so full of promise. But for Ahmad, there was no joy in the view. The gnawing feeling of being watched, of being manipulated, settled in his gut. His phone buzzed, breaking his train of thought. It was a message from Julia. "I've got the first batch of data on the airline. We have some unusual activity, but I'll need more time to dig deeper. Are you free to talk now? Ahmad didn't hesitate. He quickly typed back, yes. Call me now. His phone rang almost instantly. Julia's voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of concern in it. Ahmad, I've found something. The airline's financial records show some major inconsistencies. There are large, unexplained payments moving through their accounts, payments that don't appear to be for services rendered. I've also found connections between the airline's top executives and some high-profile figures in the corporate world, including your competitor, Blake Thompson. Blake Thompson. The name hit Ahmad like a punch to the gut. Blake had been his rival for years, always undercutting him in the tech industry, always trying to outsmart him. Ahmad had never trusted him, but he had no idea how deep Blake's influence might run. Was it possible that Blake was involved in the airline incident? Could he have orchestrated this entire thing just to get back at Ahmad? Julia, you need to keep digging, Ahmad said, his voice tight. I don't care what it takes. I need to know who's behind this, and why. I'm starting to think there's more going on here than just a messed up flight. I'll keep you posted, she replied, before ending the call. Ahmad paced the room, his thoughts spinning. Blake Thompson was a man who played dirty, always trying to gain the upper hand through underhanded tactics. But this felt different. If Blake was involved, he was playing a game much bigger than a petty rivalry. And if Blake wasn't involved, then who was pulling the strings? The deeper the mystery goes. By the time Ahmad met with his potential business partner the next day, his mind was still consumed by the mystery surrounding the airline incident. He had barely slept, and every minute spent away from his phone or his laptop felt like an eternity. But business was business, and he had a meeting to attend. His company was on the verge of securing a deal that could bring millions in revenue, and Ahmad had worked too hard to let anything jeopardize it. The meeting was at a high-end restaurant in Manhattan. The kind of place where the chandeliers sparkled above your head and the wine was aged to perfection. Ahmad, still lost in his thoughts, greeted his potential partner, a man named Marcus Hayes. Marcus was a big name in the tech world, and he had been impressed by Ahmad's recent work, particularly the acquisition of the rival company. Ahmad, good to see you. Marcus greeted him with a firm handshake. Likewise, Ahmad said, offering a smile, though his mind was elsewhere. Shall we get started? As they sat down, the conversation quickly turned to business. They discussed the future of the tech industry, the potential for innovation, and the direction Ahmad's company was heading. Marcus seemed to be genuinely interested in the opportunities Ahmad was offering, and Ahmad couldn't help but feel a sense of optimism. But even as they spoke, Ahmad couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The conversation felt like background noise, a distraction from the real problem that loomed over him. He needed answers, and the more he thought about it, the more certain he became that someone, perhaps even someone sitting at this table, knew more than they were letting on. The Web Titans. Later that afternoon, Ahmad returned to his hotel room, his mind still racing. He had tried to focus on the meeting, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the airline and the cryptic messages. Everything seemed connected. The sabotage of his flight, the mysterious figure in the terminal, the unusual payments within the airline's financial records, it all pointed to something much darker. He opened his laptop and began reviewing the data that Julia had sent him. The more he read, the more disturbing it became. It wasn't just the airline's financial irregularities that bothered him, it was the fact that the payments seemed to trace back to a series of shell companies that were connected to Blake Thompson's network. Ahmad's hands trembled slightly as he processed the information. Could Blake really be behind all of this? Was he trying to destroy Ahmad's reputation and take him down in the process? A thought crossed his mind, what if it wasn't just Blake? What if there were others involved? The idea that his entire world might be unraveling because of a handful of powerful people made his stomach churn. But who were these people? Why target him? What was their endgame? His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Julia. "I've found something even more troubling. A series of encrypted emails between the airline and several corporate figures. I can't access the content yet, but I think I've found a way in. I'll need some time." Ahmed's pulse quickened. The puzzle pieces were starting to fit together, but there were still so many missing pieces. "Julia, I need you to go through those emails, find out who's involved. Get me names, dates, everything. This is bigger than I thought. I'll make some calls on my end." As he typed out a quick reply, Ahmad felt a deep sense of foreboding. He was beginning to realize that he had stepped into a much larger game than he had originally thought. There were powerful people pulling the strings, and they were willing to go to extreme lengths to bring him down. But why? Before he could send the message, the phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Ahmad," the voice on the other end said, a calm but cold tone. "I know you're digging into things. You're getting too close to the truth. You don't want to know what happens next." Ahmed's heart skipped a beat. The voice was unfamiliar, but there was something in the way it spoke that made his skin crawl. This wasn't just a threat. This was a warning. "What do you want?" Ahmad demanded, his voice tight with anger. "Want?" The voice chuckled darkly. "I don't want anything from you. I'm just letting you know that your little investigation is about to blow up in your face. You can't stop what's coming." The line went dead. Ahmed's hands tightened around the phone. The message was clear: he was being watched. He was being manipulated. Whoever this was had eyes everywhere, and they knew exactly what he was doing. The truth comes crashing down. Hours later, as Ahmad sat in his hotel room, staring at the walls, the pieces of the puzzle were beginning to come together. Julia had sent him an encrypted file. She had managed to break through the codes and retrieve the content of the emails. What she found shocked him to his core. The emails were linked to a secret consortium of investors, some of the most powerful people in the world. The names in the emails were household names, figures that Ahmad had long respected, but they were all tied to something much darker. The consortium was using the airline as a front for a vast money laundering operation, and they were involved in countless illegal activities. But what troubled Ahmad the most was the fact that his own company was now a target. The consortium had long been aware of Ahmad's business moves. They knew about his recent acquisition and were determined to stop him. And the way they planned to do it was through his reputation. The airline sabotage, the cryptic messages, it was all part of a plan to break him, to get him to back down. But Ahmad wasn't the type to back down. He stared at the screen, his thoughts racing. This wasn't just about business. This was about survival. The world he had built was under threat from forces he had never seen coming, and if he didn't act fast, everything he had worked for could come crashing down. With a deep breath, Ahmad closed his laptop. He had made a decision. He would fight. He would find these people, expose them for what they were, and take them down, no matter what the cost. The game had changed. And now, Ahmad was ready to play. Ahmad sat at his desk, the dim light from the lamp casting long shadows across the room. His laptop was open in front of him, displaying the encrypted emails Julia had broken into. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as his eyes scanned the names of people involved in the consortium. Some of the names were recognizable: famous investors, high-profile businessmen, and corporate leaders with power extending far beyond the tech world. But the email chains didn't just detail business dealings, they discussed a well-oiled machine of corruption. The consortium was involved in not just money laundering, but also illegal arms trading, manipulation of government contracts, and coordinated corporate espionage. They were a network of people so deeply embedded in the system that they had connections everywhere, from politics to the criminal underworld. Ahmad leaned back in his chair, trying to process what he was seeing. He had suspected that the forces against him were powerful, but now the reality of it hit him. These weren't just businessmen trying to stifle his success. This was a global syndicate of influential players, with no regard for laws or morality, pulling the strings behind the scenes. The phone on his desk buzzed. He picked it up, recognizing Julia's number. "Ahmad, I've got something," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "I've traced the email exchanges back to a physical location, an office building in Brooklyn. The records show several of the key players meeting there on a regular basis. It's a secure location, and we don't have much intel on what exactly happens inside, but it's connected to everything." Ahmad's pulse quickened. He had suspected something like this. These people operated in the shadows, rarely seen by the public eye. But now, they had a location. A place where they could be found. "Is it possible to get eyes on the building?" Ahmad asked, his voice controlled but edged with anticipation. "I've already sent a team," Julia replied. "We're waiting on surveillance feeds. But we need to move fast. This group has eyes everywhere, and they won't hesitate to make things disappear if they feel threatened." Ahmad stared at the screen, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had no intention of backing down. He had fought tooth and nail to get where he was today, and no shadowy syndicate was going to take that away from him. But he also knew that he couldn't do this alone. The stakes were too high, and the risk was too great. He needed a plan. "We need to meet," Ahmad said, his voice resolute. "Come to my hotel. Let's discuss our next move. The chase begins." By the time Julia arrived at Ahmad's hotel suite, the plans were already starting to take shape in his mind. The first step would be to confirm the legitimacy of the building and the people inside it. The second step, finding a way to infiltrate their operation without alerting them to the fact that they were being investigated. Ahmad wasn't interested in making a grand statement or a spectacle. He was looking for information that could expose their illegal activities and end their reign over the corporate world. Julia walked in briskly, her usual calm demeanor replaced by a hint of worry. She closed the door behind her and took a seat across from Ahmad. "We've got eyes on the building now," Julia began, her voice low. "There's heavy security." Julia raised an eyebrow. "Underestimating you? You're going up against people who have eyes everywhere, Ahmad. You can't just walk in there and demand answers. This isn't a boardroom battle. These people have the means to make people disappear." "I know," Ahmad said, his voice hardening. "But we don't have a choice. We can't let them keep operating unchecked. They think they can control everything, but we're going to take that power away from them." Julia sat back, contemplating his words. "You're right. But we need to be careful. I've got a contact who can help us with the security systems. They've got an inside source. If we're going to move forward with this, we need to be sure we have everything covered." Ahmad took a deep breath. He knew the risks. But this was no longer just about corporate rivalries or money, it was about standing up to a system of corruption that could bring down anyone who crossed it. If he didn't act, these people would continue to destroy everything he had worked for, and countless others along the way. Infiltration. The next few days were a whirlwind. Julia's contact, a former security expert named Samir, had provided crucial intel about the building. He'd worked with various government agencies in the past and had extensive experience in bypassing high-tech security systems. After a few late-night phone calls and encrypted meetings, Samir had provided them with blueprints of the building, showing secret access points that weren't listed in the standard building plans. "Samir says there's a maintenance shaft on the back side of the building," Julia explained as they studied the blueprints together. "It's isolated from the main security feeds and gives access to the lower levels of the building. From there, we can move without triggering the alarms." Ahmad examined the plans closely, his mind calculating the risks. "If we go through the maintenance shaft, we'll avoid the guards. But once we're inside, we need to be in and out quickly. The last thing we want is to be caught in a room with no way out." "I've arranged for a distraction," Julia said, her eyes narrowing. Samir's team will be on standby, creating a diversion outside the building. It'll give us enough time to infiltrate without being noticed. Ahmad nodded. All right, let's do this. The plan was set in motion. The moment of truth. The night of the infiltration, everything felt different. The air was thick with tension, the kind of tension that comes right before a storm. Ahmad stood outside the building, his black jacket blending into the shadows. His heart beat in his chest, but his resolve remained unwavering. He had worked for this moment for years, the chance to tear down the system that had tried to destroy him and countless others. Julia was by his side, moving with purpose. Samir's team has set the diversion, she whispered. They've disabled the security cameras on the lower levels for a few minutes. We need to move fast. Ahmad gave her a nod. He could feel his adrenaline coursing through his veins. Let's go. The maintenance shaft was exactly where Samir had said it would be, hidden behind a large metal door at the back of the building. It took only a few minutes to bypass the security system and gain access. Once inside, they descended into the dimly lit corridor. The air smelled of dust and old pipes, the kind of place where no one would think to look. They moved swiftly, staying close to the walls, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Ahmad's senses were on high alert. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow seemed to hold a secret. They reached the bottom of the shaft, and from there, the real challenge began. 2 floors down, Julia whispered, glancing at her phone. That's where the meetings happen. The corporate heads, the syndicate members, they meet in a secure room on the 18th floor. Ahmad nodded. Let's make this quick. As they moved through the darkened corridors, Ahmad's thoughts raced. What would they find when they reached that room? Were they really ready to take down a powerful syndicate? Could they expose these people without putting their own lives at risk? But there was no turning back now. They had come too far. The door to the meeting room was ahead, he could feel it. The room of secrets. They reached the door. Ahmad's hand trembled for a moment before he steadied himself. This was the moment. They pushed the door open, and the scene before them froze Ahmad in place. The room was large, its walls lined with high-tech equipment and darkened monitors. At the center, a long table stretched out, surrounded by shadowy figures. They were talking, laughing, plotting. And then there was the man sitting at the head of the table, the man whose face Ahmad had only seen once, at a corporate event. Blake Thompson. Blake's eyes met Ahmad's, and for a split second, time seemed to stop. Blake's lips curled into a knowing smile. Well, Blake said coolly, looks like we have company. Ahmad's heart raced as he stood in the doorway, staring at Blake Thompson. The room was silent now, all eyes on him. Blake sat at the head of the table, his smug expression never wavering. The other figures around the table were a mix of sharp-dressed men and women, their faces a mixture of surprise and amusement. Well, Blake said, his voice calm, almost mocking. Looks like we have a little party crasher. Ahmad's mind raced. The room was a high-tech fortress, secured beyond anything Ahmad had imagined. Every inch of the building they had just infiltrated screamed power and money. But this wasn't just about the building, it was about the network. The syndicate. And now, standing before him, was the man he had been chasing all along. You've been busy, Ahmad, Blake continued, his voice smooth and almost too confident. Digging through things you don't understand. You really think you can take us down? You're not in control here. You never were. The other members of the syndicate remained silent, observing the interaction. Some were intrigued, while others seemed less concerned, as if they were accustomed to these kinds of challenges. Ahmad's jaw clenched. You've been playing with people's lives. Your operations span across entire industries, manipulating governments, laundering money, and ruining innocent lives. You think you can just get away with it? Blake's smile widened, but it wasn't one of humor. Ahmad, you don't understand the game. You've been in the tech world, chasing profits, playing with startups and acquisitions. You've never really understood the rules of the bigger game. People like us don't get taken down by someone like you. You're in over your head. Ahmad stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Blake. I'll take my chances. The tension in the room was palpable. Ahmad could feel the eyes of the other syndicate members on him, but he didn't flinch. His entire world had been turned upside down since the first cryptic message had arrived on his phone. He had fought his way to this moment, ready to expose the people who had been pulling the strings. But now that he was here, standing face to face with the man who seemed to be at the heart of it all, he had a decision to make. Blake leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning Ahmad. You know, Blake said, tapping his fingers on the table, I've been keeping track of you. You've been a thorn in my side for a while now. First, your little tech company made waves. Then, you acquired my biggest rival. And now, you think you can just waltz in here and expose us? What makes you think you have a chance? Ahmad took a deep breath, the weight of the situation heavy on his shoulders. He had no illusions about the odds he was facing. These were powerful people with resources that far exceeded his own. But one thing they didn't have was the truth. And Ahmad was determined to bring it to light. I don't need to do it alone, Ahmad said. I have allies. I have evidence. And I will expose every last one of you for what you are. Blake's expression shifted for the briefest of moments, something akin to irritation flickered in his eyes. But just as quickly, it was replaced by his usual cocky demeanor. Evidence? Blake chuckled darkly. You're playing a dangerous game, Ahmad. You think your little hacking operation will save you? Or your precious little team of misfits? You've stepped into the lion's den, and now, there's no way out. Ahmad stood tall, his resolve hardening. I didn't come here to play games. I came here to finish this. You've hurt too many people, ruined too many lives. This ends tonight. Blake stood up slowly, his towering figure making the others at the table shrink back ever so slightly. You're making a big mistake, he said, his voice low and threatening. You're not dealing with tech geeks anymore, Ahmad. This is real power. You don't just walk away from a fight like this. You have no idea what you're up against. The unveiling of the scheme. The tension in the room thickened, and for a moment, everything felt like it was frozen in time. Ahmad knew that Blake was trying to intimidate him, to make him second-guess his mission. But Ahmad had come too far to back down now. You've been operating in the shadows for far too long, Ahmad said, his voice unwavering. I know about the syndicate. The laundering, the arms trade, the corporate espionage. But the real question is, how deep does it go? How many people have you bought off to keep your empire running? Blake's smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second. But then he regained his composure, his eyes narrowing dangerously. Deep? Blake scoffed. You think I care about your moralizing? People like you think the world is about right and wrong, good and bad. It's not. It's about power. And we have it. You're just a small player in a much bigger game. So go ahead, try to expose us. Try to bring us down. But you'll fail, just like everyone else who's come before you. Ahmed's anger flared, but he forced himself to stay calm. You're wrong. It's not about power, it's about justice. And justice is coming for you. You'll see that soon enough. Blake's gaze shifted, and he nodded to one of the figures seated at the table. The man, wearing a black suit, stood up and approached Ahmad. His movements were slow, deliberate, like a predator closing in on its prey. Maybe we should make an example out of him, the man said, his voice deep and cold. Ahmed's instincts screamed at him. He had walked into a trap, and now it was too late to turn back. But he wasn't going down without a fight. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from outside the room. The door slammed open, and a team of armed security personnel stormed in, weapons drawn. It was chaos. Gunshots rang out as the syndicate members scrambled, shouting for cover. "Get down!" Julia screamed as she rushed toward Ahmad, pulling him out of the line of fire. "We need to move, now." Ahmad didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed Julia's hand, and they bolted toward the exit, pushing past the startled syndicate members who were now scrambling to protect themselves. The chaos in the room seemed to amplify by the second, and Ahmad could hear Blake's voice shouting commands, trying to regain control. As they ran down the corridor, Ahmad glanced back at the room, the smoke of gunfire clouding the air. The building was under siege now, and it was no longer just about exposing the syndicate, it was about survival. They reached the stairwell, and Julia didn't hesitate for a second. "We need to get to the rooftop," she said, her voice sharp with urgency. "Samir's team is waiting for us there with extraction." Ahmad nodded, his mind racing. The odds were stacked against them now. The building was in lockdown, and they were being hunted. But for the first time, Ahmad felt the surge of adrenaline, not just from the fear, but from the realization that he had made a choice. He had chosen to stand against the darkness, and no matter how big the opposition was, he would fight for what was right. As they ascended the stairs, the sounds of shouting and gunfire echoed through the building. Ahmad's heart pounded in his chest, but he kept moving, kept pushing forward. There was no turning back now. He had exposed the syndicate, and now it was time to finish what he had started. The final confrontation. They reached the rooftop, breathless and wide-eyed. Samir's team was waiting, ready for extraction. A helicopter hovered above them, its blades whipping through the night air, ready to take them to safety. But as Ahmad looked back toward the building, he could see the lights flashing. The syndicate wasn't going to let them escape without a fight. Julia grabbed his arm. "We've got to go, Ahmad. They're not far behind." As they climbed into the helicopter, Ahmad glanced down at the building one last time. The syndicate had tried to break him, to stop him. But he had broken through. And now, they were coming for him. The helicopter lifted off, carrying them into the night sky. But Ahmad knew that this was just the beginning. The battle wasn't over yet. The syndicate might have lost this round, but the war was far from finished. And Ahmad was ready to finish it. Ahmad's breath came in short, sharp gasps as the helicopter soared higher into the night sky. The city of New York below seemed a distant memory, its lights twinkling like distant stars. The roar of the helicopter blades filled his ears, but it wasn't the sound that had his full attention. It was the feeling in the pit of his stomach, the gnawing sense that they had narrowly escaped, but the battle wasn't over. He turned to Julia, who was sitting beside him, her face a mask of concentration. She had her phone out, furiously typing messages. Samir's team was already working on extracting every piece of data from the building they had infiltrated. But Ahmad knew that the escape didn't guarantee safety. The syndicate was powerful. They had connections, resources, and the kind of influence that could make even the most secure systems seem like child's play. "How are we looking?" Ahmad asked, his voice tight with anxiety. Julia didn't look up from her phone. "We're good for now, but this isn't over. They're already mobilizing, there's no way they'll let us walk away without retaliation. We need to keep moving." Ahmad nodded, the weight of her words settling heavily in his chest. They had exposed the syndicate, but they had also drawn their attention. That attention came with a price. The helicopter's engines hummed like a warning, signaling the calm before the storm. "Where do we go now?" Ahmad asked. Julia glanced up from her phone, her face grim. "We need to lay low for a while. I have a contact in Paris who can help us disappear for a bit, get some breathing room. But we need to make sure the data we retrieved is safe. If they get their hands on it, it's game over." The stakes had never been higher. Ahmad had been fighting for survival ever since the first message had arrived on his phone. He had no idea what this would cost him, but one thing was certain, he couldn't stop now. "I'll send the files to Samir," Julia said, her tone resolute. "He's already encrypting everything. We'll have a secure line to communicate, but for now, we need to get out of the country. The longer we stay in one place, the easier it is for them to track us." Ahmad sank back in his seat, running a hand through his hair. His thoughts raced through the possibilities. Blake and the syndicate wouldn't stop. They had too much to lose. The moment they realized the information was in the hands of someone who could expose them, they'd come after him with everything they had. The helicopter cut through the night, heading toward a secluded airstrip on the outskirts of the city. The plan was simple: get to Paris, lay low, and regroup. But Ahmad knew that nothing in his life had ever gone according to plan. If there was one thing he had learned, it was that the moment you think you're safe, that's when everything unravels. In the lion's den. Hours later, they arrived at a small, private airport on the outskirts of Paris. The French skyline greeted them with a quiet elegance, but there was no comfort in the calm. Ahmad could feel the weight of the world on his shoulders. He had taken risks to get here, and while the flight had been uneventful, the knowledge of what awaited them next loomed large. Julia was already on her phone, arranging their transportation. She turned to Ahmad. "We need to get to the hotel first. The team has secured a place for us in the city. From there, we can figure out our next move." Ahmad nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. The syndicate was still out there, and if anything, they were likely doubling down on their efforts to find him. His role in the syndicate's fall was far from over, but with their resources spread thin, he had to play it carefully. They arrived at a high-end hotel in the heart of Paris, quiet, discreet, and perfect for laying low. The City of Lights had never felt more like a cage. Inside their room, Ahmad found himself pacing. There was too much at stake to be passive now. The revelations about the syndicate were just the beginning. The scope of their operation was vast, but Ahmad was determined to finish what he had started. Julia came over to him, holding her phone. "I've heard from Samir. He's managed to secure most of the data, but there's still more we need to retrieve. Some of it is buried deep in their system. We'll need to go back for it." Ahmad stopped pacing, turning to face her. "Go back? Are you crazy? If they find out we're coming back, we'll be dead before we even get in the door." "I know," she replied, her eyes sharp. "But if we don't, they'll keep coming after us. We've only scratched the surface of what they're doing. We need the full picture, every last piece of evidence." The thought of returning to the heart of the syndicate's operations made Ahmad's skin crawl, but Julia was right. The truth had to come out. These people couldn't be allowed to continue operating in the shadows, ruining lives with impunity. But if they were going to succeed, they had to be smarter than before. "All right," Ahmad said, his voice steady, "but we do it my way. We're not taking any chances this time. I'll need a team. I'll need backup. We're not walking into that building alone." Julia nodded. "I've already been in touch with Samir's people. They're ready to move on our command." Ahmad took a deep breath. "Then let's move." Preparing for the final assault. The next few days were a blur. Ahmad and Julia spent their time organizing their plan, refining every detail. They couldn't afford any mistakes. The syndicate had eyes everywhere, and they would stop at nothing to keep their operations hidden. They spent hours with Samir, discussing the building's layout, the security measures in place, and the best way to access the data they still needed. Every decision they made was calculated and precise. They couldn't afford to underestimate their enemies. On the evening of their operation, they gathered in a small safe house just outside Paris. Samir's team was already in position, ready to support the mission. The atmosphere was tense, and Ahmad could feel the pressure mounting. Every fiber of his being screamed for him to hesitate, to back away from the danger. But he couldn't. The truth had to be exposed. "This is it," Samir said, his voice low and steady as he surveyed the group. "We'll move in under the cover of night. We've compromised the building's external security, but once we're inside, we'll need to move quickly. Time is critical." Ahmad nodded, his mind sharp and focused. "We're not here to waste time. Get the data, and get out. If anything goes wrong, we abort the mission immediately." Julia gave him a pointed look. "We stick to the plan. We get what we need, and we get out." The group moved in silence, preparing for the operation ahead. Ahmad felt the weight of their determination, but it was still a battle within himself to push forward. Every step he took felt like a leap into the unknown, and every breath he took seemed to carry the weight of the decision he had made. Infiltration, the final chapter. The operation began under the cover of darkness. The night was silent, almost eerily quiet as they approached the building once more. This time, there were no distractions, no mistakes. The syndicate wouldn't know what hit them. Samir's team had already bypassed the external security systems. They moved like ghosts, blending into the shadows, their movements precise and calculated. Ahmad and Julia followed closely behind, their eyes scanning every corner, every potential threat. As they reached the maintenance shaft again, the familiar sense of unease washed over Ahmad. The last time they had been here, it had been a race against time. Now, it felt like a final, decisive moment. They had no room for error. The descent into the building was swift, and within minutes, they were inside. The team worked in silence, moving toward the central server room. Ahmad's heart pounded in his chest. They were so close. He could feel it. This was the moment that would decide everything. They reached the server room, and Samir immediately went to work, connecting to the system and extracting the final pieces of data. But as they worked, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Ahmad's pulse quickened. The syndicate knew they were there. The door to the server room burst open, and armed guards flooded in, guns drawn. It was a trap. They had known all along. "Move!" Ahmad shouted as he dove for cover, pulling Julia behind him. Gunfire erupted, filling the room with chaos. Samir's team returned fire, creating a diversion. Ahmad's mind raced. They had to finish this. The data was almost in their hands. The ultimate showdown. The firefight was intense. Every shot felt like it could be their last. But amidst the chaos, Ahmad stayed focused on his goal. They had come too far to fail now. "Samir, are we good?" Ahmad yelled, his voice cutting through the gunfire. "We're almost there." Samir shouted back. With one final push, Samir extracted the last file from the server. "Got it," he yelled triumphantly. Ahmad's heart skipped a beat. It was done. They had the data. Now, all they had to do was escape. But just as they were about to make their exit, Blake appeared at the door, his cold, calculating gaze fixed on Ahmad. "You think you've won?" Blake sneered. "This is just the beginning. You can't escape what's coming." Ahmad stood tall, his resolve unshaken. "You're done, Blake. Your empire ends here." Blake's eyes flared with rage, but before he could respond, Samir's team opened fire once again, forcing Blake to retreat. The syndicate's power had been broken. As Ahmad and his team made their way to the exit, the weight of the moment settled over him. They had exposed the syndicate, and they had won. But the war was far from over. The helicopter waiting for them outside was a symbol of their escape, but Ahmad knew that the real battle, of bringing the syndicate's full operation to light, was just beginning.